Hello and welcome to Our Special Lives. I'm Laura McGrath, and today we continue part 2 of our series on 7 strategies for helping children with autism. We're joined today by Julie Flynn, who has a master's degree in special education from Virginia Tech and is a certified behavior analyst. She's been a special education teacher for 13 years in a variety of settings, and for the last 12 years has been in private practice working with children and young adults on the autism spectrum. She's here today to give us a variety of strategies that parents of children with autism can use across a range of ages and abilities. And don't forget to check out part 1 of this series. Before we get started, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share. The next strategy that you talked about was social stories.
Okay, so a social story is very helpful for when you're doing something new, like if you're going on a vacation, a new type of appointment, like a community outing, or as I mentioned earlier, places where problem behaviors occur, dentists, doctors, haircuts. And so how they work is they're written from the first person point of view. Like I mentioned earlier, some kids like visuals. There's a program called PixWriter that as you type, pictures pop up as you write it. So it says, I'm going to the doctor's office.
Is that an app or a website or?
When I was teaching, it was a program that the IT people would give us, but I'm sure if you looked up PixWriter, you could find different.
Okay, I'll try to link to that if I can find it.
Right. So they're written from the first person point of view. They can include visuals, and you really want to break it down by steps. So let's say you're going on a family trip. You haven't gone on a family trip in a while, or it's the first time ever flying on a plane. You can break it down. First, I will take a taxi to the airport with my family. Second, I will need to wait in a line to check my suitcase. If I think it's too loud, I can use my earphones or play on my iPad. And so it's just a way to kind of, like I said, pre-warnings, just letting them know what they're in for, giving some strategies. If you're feeling X, you can do X, and try to end it with a positive. So after I sit calmly during my haircut, I will get to pick out a treat from the dollar store or Target. And once again, try to use that specific language. Don't just say, if I do a good job at the haircut, what is that target behavior? Sitting calmly in the chair. And so use that kind of language.
So I think you were mentioning before with that program, Pick Stories, was that what it was?
Mm-hmm.
PixWriter. So if you had a child who was more on the nonverbal side of things, you would want to show them visuals, or I guess it depends on the child's level of receptive versus expressive language skills. Okay.
Right. And, what I do with the social stories is for a younger learner, I would read it to them, and I would read it multiple times, leading up to whatever the event is.
So when would you suggest starting? Like, let's say you're going on a trip and you're going on next month. Would you start as early as possible, or would you wait until like a week before, or how?
So that honestly depends on the kid. So I have one client and she has gone to Disney probably 10 times. I've never been to Disney. So I always tell her I'm going to hide in her suitcase and pop out. No, you can't. And so for her, what her parents have found is if they tell her too soon about the trip to Disney, she perseverates on it. And that's all she can think about. And so
she ruminates.
Right. Yeah. Okay. She just when are we leaving? When are we going to go? Like she gets so excited. It's like all she can think about.
Okay. So that's like hyper focus. So if you have a child who like hyper focuses and ruminates, maybe best to save the social story until maybe a week out or a few days out.
Yeah, even a few days out.
Okay,
and,
got it.
And it might just depend on the situation. There's kind of bigger life events and not as big. So let's say it's something like a birthday party and they've just never been to a birthday party, or let's say it's at Chuck E. Cheese and they've never done a birthday party. They've been to Chuck E. Cheese and they've been to a birthday party, but they've never been to a birthday party at Chuck E. Cheese. And so kind of how do we blend those two? And so, even for something that's not as big of a life event, a couple days out, and then definitely like the day of. And for some of these things too, I should talk about like the haircuts and the dentist and stuff. If that's not a situation that's going well for you, sometimes you need to back off and break it down and maybe just go into the haircut place, sit and have a little Rice Krispie treat or whatever, and walk out. And just kind of slowly build yourself up to those. My friend was a dental hygienist, and they had some kids that would just come in, sit in the chair for a minute, they'd hold an instrument and walk out. And sometimes you just have to kind of take a few steps back to be able to move forward.
Is that like a desensitization process that's happening so that the child doesn't become overwhelmed?
That, and you're taking what was previously a negative experience and you're turning it into a positive one.
Okay.
And so you're trying to kind of do exactly what you said, make it a more positive experience.
So you would combine that technique with a reinforcer when you're there. Okay.
Right. And that's where you can kind of, as a parent, gauge, like, okay, it seems like when we're in there for more than 4 minutes is when I'm really starting to see like some behaviors come out, or they're telling me like, I don't want to. And so, okay, 4 minutes seems like where they're starting to melt down. So we're just going to go in for 2 minutes.
Okay.
And kind of timing that based
on. So you
on
want to cut it off before you start seeing that the child's becoming too overwhelmed.
Correct.
And then would you also use the anxiety reducers in that scenario?
Sure.
Okay.
Definitely.
So maybe adding in a headphone, or maybe bringing a fidget or something like that.
Right, exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
You can start to combine these strategies. And then, so you might have the social story with the fidget, with the earphone, with the reinforcement. And so you'll see, and you might have a timer. Hey, 2 minutes, we're out of here. We're going to get frozen yogurt. And so you'll start to see like, these as kind of a toolbox, and you can kind of start to mix and match and blend them together.
Okay. Okay, great. That's really helpful. And then again, sort of with the with a child who might have not as much ability to express verbally, how would that go down, do you think? If, let's say, somebody could their receptive language skills were good, but their ability to speak is not there. But
Sure.
How would that scenario go?
So
with a social story scenario, or what you're describing with going somewhere where there's resistance or overwhelm.
And that's where, you can still do the same things, figure out, let's just take a haircut, for example. The kid won't sit still, and the haircut is trying to cut it and they just won't sit still. So for a nonverbal learner, similar, just try to establish what a reinforcer is. So maybe they love Thomas the Train, and they are going to get to watch Thomas the Train on the iPad while they're getting their haircut, and at the same time have a lollipop if that's what they like. And so, similar things, you find what they're willing to work for, the amount of time they can tolerate it. Maybe the haircut ends up taking an hour because they sit for 3 minutes in the chair, and then they need to move around and have a break, and then they sit for 3.
Now, do you find that
I've had parents come from doctor's appointment, they're like, that was awful, they didn't get my kid at all. And so they do end up having to shop around a little bit.
Okay.
So, or maybe for the haircut scenario, maybe you arrange it that you're the first person there or the last person there, so there's less people there. And so I say it usually takes me like a few months to get to know my new people with autism, and just to know their triggers. And once I really know a kid, I can think of a situation like, okay, the orchestra is having a assembly today, and how is that going to work for this kid? So, okay, we're going to sit in the back. So we're near an exit. We're going to have the earphones, and they're going to have a fidget, and just really thinking through how you think they'll react in that situation and what they can tolerate.
And would that be a scenario where you'd also do your like plan A and plan B? Like plan A is that we, can sit here, but if it becomes too overwhelming, our plan B is that we're going to like walk out and take a break in the lobby or something like that.
Right. And I would also say sometimes you have to learn when to pick your battles. So I went to work with my client the other day, and she's in middle school. She's in 6th grade, and they had a haunted house in the school. And she told her teachers straight up, I don't want to go to this haunted house. And I think, again, they didn't use these strategies. They didn't use the social story. They didn't give her like a run through of what to expect in the haunted house. And so they ended up making her do it, even though she said, I don't want to do this. And then she ended up having a complete meltdown, crying. She couldn't get through any of the rest of the day because she was so upset. And I think that, sometimes hopefully her teachers learned a lesson from that. Like, okay, she did tell us, what could we do differently next time to get her through this? And once again, pick your battles. Was a haunted house really something that she needed to do? Probably not. Let's say she was doing an orientation at the high school to learn how high school works. That's an important thing. She needs to be able to get through that. So picking what you really think is valuable and necessary. And in that case, she straight up told them, I don't want to do this. So
I'm curious, when you work with a client, do you have interface and communication with the teaching team, or is it separate as a private therapist?
It depends. So each case is different. Sometimes I'm on a group email with the parent. And so as a private therapist,
you mean with the teacher?
With the teacher, yeah. Well, the teacher will email the parent and I'll be included on that.
Okay, I got you.
And usually in that case, the parent has to sign a waiver for consent to communicate. Or depending, sometimes teachers will have like a daily note home that they send home. And so I can look at their folder and say like, okay, what kind of day did they have? And that's really helpful when teachers do. I know it can be cumbersome, but especially for the younger learners and the nonverbal learners, having a daily note is just so helpful, because you can't say, how was your day? What'd you do today? Did you have any problems today? And so just having that note, so as the parent or the therapist, you can kind of check in and see, how their day was. And sometimes even for kids that are like, have some verbal ability, it just provides a prompt like, oh, I see you, had a field trip to the farm today. How'd that go? And so that daily communication is really helpful, especially for the nonverbal kids or ones with less language.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, that was wonderful to learn more about how social stories can be used as a strategy. Now let's talk about zones of regulation.
This is a basic zones of regulation chart.
Okay, so basically we've got blue, green, yellow, and red, and I'm going to link to this below.
Okay, so the idea of this is to develop a way for kids to start communicating their emotions, which can sometimes be challenging for all kids, to be honest. And so the blue zone is basically where they might be feeling sad, sick, tired, or blue, or just feeling kind of sluggish. Green is good. You're happy, you're calm, you're feeling good, you're focused, you're ready to learn. Yellow, you're kind of starting to escalate. You might be frustrated, worried, feeling silly or wiggly, excited, and some loss of control. And then the red zone is you're mad, you're angry, you're terrified, you're yelling, you're hitting, you're out of control. You might be, having a meltdown. And so the first step is just learning how to identify where you are, what zone you're in. So a lot of times I start by doing this while we read books or watch a show or watch a YouTube video, just to kind of take it off the kid and put it onto someone else. And so, gosh, I think once the kid went into the haunted house, they really started going into the yellow zone.
Okay, so you talk about it from the point of view of another child and sort of
Sure.
basically like let them figure out what zone that child is in, and then eventually they can maybe apply it to themselves.
Correct. Or even if you're in your, in your house or the classroom, you can start to use this on siblings or even parents. Like, I think daddy's going into the yellow zone when you knocked his drink over, like,
okay.
And so kind of once they get the concept and the ideas, and once again, if you're talking about more of a nonverbal learner, they can just point, how are you feeling? And you can just have them touch where they're feeling. They don't have to communicate it per se.
Got it.
And then once they kind of get good at identifying in other people, then you can start applying it to yourself or to themselves. And once they're really getting a swing of that and having accuracy with that, then the next step would be to start introducing calming strategies. So, I see you're getting into the yellow zone, and really talking about and practicing and role playing and modeling, what can I do to go from the yellow zone to the green zone? And this can be challenging, figuring out what those calming strategies are, because what works for one person might not work for another. Playing with this fidget might calm me down, but someone else might need a weighted blanket and headphones with music on, especially if you're talking about more of like, the red zone. I've dealt with kids that are in real crisis and require multiple adults, especially if they have self-injurious behaviors. In some more severe cases, you get kids that bite or bang their head or hit themselves. And that can be a lot more challenging to figure out what calms them down. And
so
as a teacher,
sorry.
Oh,
I was
no,
just gonna say, since you got so much experience, can you rattle off maybe like 10 things on the menu of calming strategies that you've seen or used with your kids?
So like I said, sometimes it's the sensory, the weighted blankets, the headphones, listening to music, and for some kids, drawing, reading a book. For some kids, they just need like a timeout corner, or we'll call it like a calming corner, where we've just made like a little area with pillows that they can kind of hide in, so they can kind of take a time out. And as the parent or the teacher, what's important in our role in all of this is seeing, okay, I know this kid just hopped to here. And some kids, it might take them a while to get to here. Some kids can go right from here to here like that. And so as a teacher, it's kind of looking for those triggers, like, okay, he's starting to really tap his pencil, or he's starting to bite his fingers or make fists. And so trying to figure out, okay, I know this kid, I can tell if I push him 10 more seconds, we are going to that red zone. And so kind of like I said, picking your battles, figuring out, hey, you know what? Instead of 10 more problems, let's just do one more problem and then take a break. And so kind of figuring out how to de-escalate the behavior before it even gets to the red zone.
So what happens if a child is in the red zone? Like what do you find, with your experience?
That's
works?
A great question. And so first thing is back off demands, decrease your language, keep it simple. When they're in crisis mode, I just see so many adults trying to talk to the kid and negotiate with the kid. At that moment, they're not really listening to anything you're saying. So when they're in the red zone, you're really trying to decrease demands and increase reinforcement. So let's say they are just completely tantruming and they just had 5 seconds where they were calm. Wow, I like how you were just quiet. That's really good. You're starting to go back to the yellow zone, and just trying to find those quick moments where you can verbally reinforce, or, you don't really want to hand them a toy in the middle of all of this, but just trying to systematically reinforce any level of decrease. And then just know, like I said.
And you said decrease language. So what would be, if you just had to choose a word or two to a child in the red zone, what would you say?
You might be saying deep breath, deep breath. Let's say they're hitting you. You might be having to block their hands, quiet hands, quiet hands, quiet hands. You see a lot of adults that are like, okay, Jimmy, you're really off the handle right now. You really need to just get back to your desk and get back to that worksheet and blah, 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 blah. And the kids just like, all you're doing is making that behavior worse.
So expressing the behavior that you want to see in that moment rather than the behavior that's actually going on.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And what's the hardest part, I think, is as someone dealing with someone in the red zone, is you staying calm and trying to not show emotion. I had one girl, and they were having a class party for the end of 4th grade. And she looks at me and she goes, "It's going to be Domino's pizza, right?" That's plan A, but plan B is they might do Papa John's because it's less expensive. So sure enough, here comes this sweet little room mom with 10 Papa John's pizzas. And I'm like, oh boy. And she puts them down on that table, and Jenna goes running after the pizzas and shoves all the pizzas for the entire 4th grade on the floor. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. So I managed to get her in my classroom, and her mom happened to be volunteering that day. And she comes in, and Jenna's freaking out. She's clawing me up and down the arms. I looked at her mom. I go, "Who has this, you or me?" And she goes, "You got it." So as this kid's trying to claw me, I'm trying to just stay calm. Quiet hands, just block. And the biggest thing, obviously, is safety. You want to be sure that the kid's doesn't have access to anything that could hurt them. and that any other children in the area are safe, and that you're safe as much as can be. So.
Okay, that sounds good. It sounds like a very challenging situation, but the strategies that you've given are helpful. It sounds
and
like.
Then it's important later, like you were saying, depending where they are with their level of communication, once they're calm later, then that's when you go back and revisit. Like, hey, you did X, Y, and Z. What could we do differently next time? And that's, again, you can talk about that. You could write another social story. Like, I was really mad when I saw the Papa John's pizza. Next time I can, and then, put whatever behaviors in that they should have done differently.
Okay.
And then a week later, her mom emailed me. She went to a pool party. She ate the Papa John's, no problem. So,
well, had you worked with her? Had you done like after the incident?
You know what? It was the last day of school, and I couldn't have any follow-up with her.
So she basically came to that on her own.
Right.
Okay. Well, that's great. That's awesome. That's a happy story. So, okay. So next strategy, forward chaining, backward chaining.
So this is basically a strategy for teaching new concepts or one that's challenging. And the idea is to break a task down into steps. And once again, you can use visuals as needed. So it could be something like a self-help skill, like putting on their shoes, getting dressed in the morning, brushing their teeth. So let's just take brushing the teeth as an example. For forward chaining, you would have the kid do the first step. So maybe it's get the toothbrush and wet it. And then you model all the rest of the steps through the chain up until their teeth are cleaned. For backward chaining, you would do the opposite. You would do all the first steps, and then maybe the last step would be rinsing the toothbrush off and putting it away. And the idea is you're making a task analysis of all of the steps. And once they've mastered the first one, I would say at least they've done it 3 times independently, then okay, I can move on to the next step. And then it's just, you can slowly work yourself down through the chain or back up through the chain until they've mastered the task. And so I've had parents use this for like getting dressed in the morning. They just can't do it. They just won't get dressed. I can't get them to do it. It takes an hour. So once again, just have them do the first step or the last step and then work your way up. And that can kind of just help get through those challenges of the day.
Got it. Okay. And then are you using reinforcers along the way or no? Reinforcers aren't part of this?
Yeah, you definitely could use a reinforcer if you needed to. And so, sometimes there's verbal reinforcers. Oh, you put your socks on. Awesome. There's physical reinforcers. You give them a little tickle or whatever they like, or, a twirl or whatever. And then there's the physical reinforcers, which could be a toy or a fidget or an edible. So just depending.
Okay. That's great. And let's see. The last one I think was the cool, not cool game.
So this is one where we can talk about the different behaviors that we see: chewing with your mouth open, saying certain words. And this can be just a fun way to kind of teach kind of those pro-social behaviors versus ones that are not as, a little bit more maladaptive. And so it could be as simple as cool or not cool. You can just vote with your thumb, or you can make a card, cool, not cool. Or once again, you can get fancy and have different pictures. You could even put a photo of the kid on here, cool, not cool. Okay. And so it's just a fun way to act things out. Like, I grabbed your pen instead of, hey, could I borrow your pen, please? And the group can kind of vote. Was that a not cool behavior or a cool behavior? And then it also provides an opportunity for you to model it. Like, oh, yeah, you just grabbed their pen. That wasn't cool. What would be a good way to ask for that pen? And so it's just a way to work on those behaviors in kind of a fun setting. And then, you can start to apply it to the classroom, so-and-so, grabs something or says something like, you smell. And you can take that opportunity just real quick within the classroom to say, hey, was that cool or not cool?
Okay. And if you're one-on-one, if you're a parent and you're sort of one-on-one with your child, can you like role play? Like maybe the parent does that behavior and the kid gets to vote, cool, not cool?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely. Yeah. You can make it a game. And then how this kind of starts to translate is, you're at the soccer game and your kid shoves someone, and hey, was that cool or not cool? And you can start to apply it to their everyday life as just a friendly way. Like, you were talking about, like, instead of saying like, stop flapping your hands, like, hey, let's have quiet hands, and just trying to use language that's just like a little bit more friendly. And
yeah.
so.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, these have all been fantastic tips. And I'm going to link to your email below if anybody in the audience has specific questions for you. I know you do private sessions. So if someone wants to get in touch with you about, doing a virtual session to get some ideas for their specific kid, you'd be open to that. So
Sure.
I'm just going to put your email below. And if anybody wants to learn more, they're free to
And where I feel
send you an email.
fortunate is to have had the 13 years in the classroom before I did private practice. It's nice I've sat on both sides of the table. So I've been the one doing the IEPs, writing all of the goals, and then I've been there as a support for the parents. And so I'm appreciative for that time, because I know how challenging it can be as a classroom teacher. So
yeah. Well, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This was really informative, and I hope it won't be the last time you're on with us.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.